Captain Jake Morrison stared at the screen in front of him and rubbed his tired eyes. Space looked the same as it always did in the Andromeda sector, dark and empty with distant stars that seemed too far away to matter. His ship, the Terra Nova, had been mapping this area for 3 weeks now, and they had found nothing interesting. Just rocks and gas clouds and the usual cosmic dust that made his crew complain about cleaning the sensors every day. Jake was 32 years old and had been commanding exploration ships for 8 years. He liked the work because it kept him away from the politics back on Earth. Out here in space, things were simple. You found new things, you cataloged them, you moved on to the next system. No committees, no meetings, no politicians asking him to explain why humans needed to explore when other alien species had already mapped most of the galaxy. His second-in-command, Lisa Brooks, walked onto the bridge carrying a cup of coffee that smelled better than anything had a right to smell. In deep space, Lisa was good at her job and never complained about the long missions. She had short brown hair and the kind of steady personality that made Jake glad she was on his crew. "Anything new on the scanners?" Lisa asked as she sat down at her station. "Same as yesterday," Jake said. "Empty space and more empty space." Dr. Sam Rodriguez looked up from his science station where he had been studying some rock samples they had collected from an asteroid belt 2 days ago. Sam was the ship's expert on alien cultures and biology, which was a fancy way of saying he knew more about strange things than anyone else Jake had ever met. Sam had thick glasses and always seemed excited about something, even when that something was just a piece of space rock. "Actually," Sam said, pushing his glasses up his nose, "I'm getting some unusual readings about 20,000 kilometers off our starboard side." Jake turned his chair to face Sam. "What kind of unusual?" "Metal signatures that don't match anything. In our database. The composition is strange, like it's been exposed to cosmic radiation for a very long time." Lisa was already working on her controls. "I'm picking it up now. It's big, Captain, really big." Jake stood up and walked over to the main viewing screen. "Put it on visual." The screen flickered, and then showed them something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. Floating in space was a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Terra Nova, and shaped like a twisted spiral that seemed to bend light around its edges. The metal looked ancient and scarred, as if it had been drifting through space for thousands of years. "Have you ever seen anything like that before?" Jake asked Sam. Sam was already scanning the ship with every instrument they had. "Never. The design doesn't match any known species in the galactic database. The metal is some kind of alloy I can't identify, and the energy readings are almost zero. It's like a ghost ship." Jake made his decision quickly, the way he always did. "Lisa, take us in closer. Sam, keep scanning. I want to know everything about that ship before we get within docking range." As they moved closer, more details became visible. The ship had markings along its hull that looked like writing, but not in any language Jake recognized. There were also symbols that seemed to glow faintly, as if they had their own internal power source that refused to die even after all these years in space. "Captain," Lisa said, "I'm not detecting any life signs. The ship appears to be completely dead." "Any signs of damage?" Jake asked. "Some impact marks on the outer hull, but nothing that looks like weapons fire. This ship didn't die in battle. It looks like it was just abandoned." Sam was practically bouncing in his chair with excitement. "Captain, the computer is trying to match those symbols with historical records. Some of them look similar to markings found on ruins throughout the galaxy, ruins that predate every known civilization. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You mean this could be a ship from the first ones? The first ones were legend, stories told by the oldest species in the galaxy about beings who had built the first great civilizations millions of years ago and then vanished without a trace. Most scientists thought they were myths, stories made up to explain things that couldn't be understood any other way. I can't say for certain, Sam said, but the age of the metal and the style of construction would fit the timeline. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of excitement and nervousness on their faces that he felt in his own chest. This was the kind of discovery that could change everything, or get them all killed if they weren't careful. All right, he said. We're going aboard. Lisa, prepare an away team. Sam, you're coming with me. Full environmental suits and portable scanners. If this ship has been drifting out here for millions of years, there's no telling what we might find inside. 2 hours later, Jake was floating through the airlock of the alien ship, his suit's lights cutting through darkness that seemed older than human civilization. The interior of the ship was vast and empty, with corridors that stretched away into shadows their lights couldn't penetrate. The walls were covered with more of the glowing symbols, and the air had a strange quality that made their voices echo in unexpected ways. Atmosphere is breathable, Lisa reported through the comm system, but I recommend we keep the suits on anyway. They moved deeper into the ship, following corridors that seemed to spiral inward toward some central destination. Along the way, they passed rooms filled with equipment they couldn't understand, and chambers that might have been living quarters for beings much larger than humans. Finally, they reached what had to be the ship's bridge, a circular room with a raised platform in the center and strange control panels that still glowed with soft light. But it was what happened when Jake stepped onto the central platform that changed everything. The moment his boots touched the platform, the entire room exploded with light and sound. Holographic displays filled the air around them, showing maps and alien writing and images of beings that looked almost human but not quite. Then a voice spoke, not through their comm systems, but somehow directly into their heads, speaking in a language none of them recognized but somehow understanding. Anyway, genetic match confirmed, the voice said. Royal bloodline detected. Heir apparent identified. Welcome, young king, to your inheritance. The holograms shifted and focused on Jake, scanning him with beams of light that made his skin tingle. Sam was frantically taking readings while Lisa kept her hand near her weapon, but Jake could only stand there and stare as the ancient technology recognized something in him that he didn't even know existed. The bloodline has survived, the voice continued. The time of testing approaches. The galaxy awaits its rightful ruler. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went quiet. The holograms faded, the lights dimmed, and they were left standing, in a room that seemed ordinary again, except for the 3 humans who now carried the most dangerous secret in galactic history. Jake Morrison sat in his captain's chair and stared at the communication console that had been buzzing with incoming messages for the past 6 hours. Word of their discovery had somehow leaked out, despite his orders to keep everything classified. He had sent an encrypted report to Admiral Kate Lewis back on Earth, but apparently that hadn't been enough to keep the story contained. Captain, Lisa said from her station, we're getting another request for an interview. This one is from the Galactic News Network. Jake rubbed his forehead where a headache had been building all morning. Tell them the same thing we told the others. No comment. Sam looked up from his science station, where he had been analyzing the data they had collected from the ancient ship. Jake, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we should consider going public with the full story. Are you crazy? Lisa asked. Do you know what would happen if every species in the galaxy thought humans were trying to take over? Jake had been asking himself the same question ever since they had left the derelict ship and returned to the Terra Nova. The genetic scanner had been clear about what it found in his DNA, but that didn't mean he understood what it meant or what he was supposed to do about it. He was an explorer, not a king. The comm system chimed with an incoming priority transmission. "Captain Morrison," came a familiar voice. "This is Admiral Lewis. Please respond immediately." Jake activated the secure channel. "Admiral, I sent you my report. I assume you've read it." "I've read it, Captain, and I've also been fielding calls from every government official on Earth for the past 4 hours. The story is spreading faster than we can control it. I need you to return to Earth immediately." "With respect, Admiral, I think it might be safer for everyone if I stayed out here for a while." There was a long pause before Admiral Lewis spoke. Again. "Captain, staying out there isn't an option. The Galactic Council has already called an emergency session. They want to see you and they want proof of your claims." Jake looked at his crew and saw the worry in their faces. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that might get you killed if you can't provide it," the Admiral said. "There are already species calling this a human conspiracy to seize power. Others are demanding genetic testing of their own populations to see if they have royal bloodlines too. The entire political structure of the galaxy is starting to shake." Before Jake could respond, Sam's console started beeping urgently. "Captain, we have company. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace and they're heading straight for us." Lisa was already working her controls. "I'm reading 1 Earth vessel and 2 alien ships. The alien ships aren't broadcasting identification signals." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Admiral, we may have a problem out here." "Captain," came a new voice over the comm system. "This is Ambassador Ryan Clark speaking from the Earthship Defender. I'm here to escort you back to Earth space, but we seem to have picked up some uninvited guests." The view screen showed 3 ships approaching their position. The Earthship was one of the new heavy cruisers that Jake had seen in the fleet reports, but the 2 alien vessels were sleek and dangerous looking, with the kind of design that suggested they were built for fighting rather than exploring. "Unknown vessels," Lisa broadcast on the standard diplomatic frequency. "You are approaching an Earth exploration ship in neutral space. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came immediately, but not from the alien ships. Instead, a holographic image appeared on the bridge showing a tall, elegant being with pale blue skin and silver eyes. Jake recognized the species immediately as Velkoth, one of the oldest and most powerful races in the galaxy. "I am Commander Thex of the Imperial Guard," the being said in a voice that sounded like ice breaking. "We are here to investigate claims that a human has falsely declared himself heir to the galactic throne. Such claims are an insult to the true ruler of the galaxy, Empress Zara Velkoth." Jake stood up slowly, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "Commander Thex, I haven't declared myself anything. We discovered an ancient ship and it activated some kind of genetic scanner. That's all." "That's all?" Commander Thex's silver eyes seemed to glow brighter. "You claim to carry the blood of the first ones, the right to rule over every species in the galaxy, and you say that's all?" Sam stepped forward. "Commander, we have extensive sensor data from the derelict ship. The technology appears to be genuine. First one's construction and the genetic analysis was performed by equipment we couldn't possibly have faked." "Convenient," Commander Thex said. "Ancient technology that no one can verify, making claims that support human ambitions for galactic domination." Ambassador Clark's voice cut through the tension. "Commander Thex, Captain Morrison is under the protection of Earth's government. Any hostile action against him would be considered an act of war. Jake saw something flicker across Commander Thex's face that might have been amusement. War, Ambassador? Between your 100 worlds and our 1,000-year empire? How entertaining. The second alien ship finally transmitted its own message. The being that appeared on screen was shorter and broader than Commander Thex, with green-scaled skin and large yellow eyes. Jake didn't recognize the species immediately. "I am General Corks of the Hegemony Fleet," the being said, in a voice that sounded like gravel grinding together. "We are here to prevent any human deception from destabilizing galactic peace. If this human truly carries royal blood, he will submit to genetic testing by neutral parties." "And if he doesn't submit?" Ambassador Clark asked. General Corks showed his teeth in what was definitely not a smile. "Then we will assume the claims are false and act accordingly." Jake felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. 3 ships, 2 of them hostile, surrounding his exploration vessel. His crew looking to him for leadership in a situation no Earth captain had ever faced before. The fate of human standing in the galaxy potentially hanging on his next decision. "Commander, Thex, General Corks," Jake said, keeping his voice as steady as he could. "I'll submit to any genetic testing you want, but I want it done by the full Galactic Council, not just your people. And I want guarantees of safe passage for my crew regardless of the results." Lisa leaned over and whispered, "Captain, are you sure about this?" Jake nodded. "If I really am carrying some kind of royal bloodline, then hiding it won't make it go away. And if I'm not, then proving that publicly might be the only way to stop this from getting worse." Commander Thex was quiet for a long moment. "Very well, human. You will accompany us to Council space. Your crew may return to Earth unharmed, assuming they cooperate fully with our investigation." "Not acceptable," Ambassador Clark said immediately. "Captain Morrison travels with full diplomatic protection, and his crew stays with him." General Corks made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans making demands when you should be begging for mercy. Your arrogance knows no bounds." Jake made his decision quickly, the way he always did when faced with impossible choices. "Ambassador, I appreciate Earth's protection, but this is bigger than just me or my crew. If there's really something in my DNA that connects me to the first ones, then the entire galaxy has a right to know about it." Sam looked at him with concern. "Jake, we don't know what they'll do to you." "We don't know what they'll do to Earth if we don't cooperate," Jake replied. "At least this way we control part of the process." Admiral Lewis's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain Morrison, you are not authorized to surrender yourself to alien custody." Jake looked at his crew one more time, seeing the loyalty and fear in their faces. "Admiral, with respect, I think I stopped taking orders from Earth the moment that ancient scanner recognized something in my blood. If I really am what that machine says I am, then maybe it's time I started acting like it." He turned back to the view screen where Commander Thex and General Corks were waiting. "I'll come with you to the Galactic Council. But my crew comes too, and we travel in our own ship. Those are my terms." Commander Thex studied him for a moment that seemed to last forever. "Acceptable. But any attempt to flee or contact unauthorized parties will result in the immediate destruction of your vessel." "Understood," Jake said, and wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake in human history. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the vast chamber on Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council, and tried not to think about how many different ways he could die in the next few hours. Around him, representatives from 47 Different species sat in rising tiers of seats, their alien eyes focused on him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The genetic testing had taken 3 days. Scientists from 12 different species had taken samples of his blood, his DNA, even individual cells from inside his mouth. They had run tests he didn't understand using equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie, and every single test had come back with the same impossible result. Jake Morrison, human explorer from Earth, carried genetic markers that matched the royal bloodline of the first ones. "The results are clear," announced High Counselor Vex, a tall, thin being with blue-gray skin who served as the neutral moderator for council proceedings. "The human does indeed carry the genetic signature we have found in ruins throughout the galaxy. The question now is whether we accept the legitimacy of this claim." Empress Zara Velkoth rose from her ornate seat in the highest tier of the chamber. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, with pale skin that seemed to glow and silver hair that moved like liquid mercury. She had ruled the galaxy for over 300 years, and she looked at Jake like he was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "High Counselor," the Empress said in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber, "genetic markers can be faked. Technology can be corrupted. The humans have had access to First One's ruins for over a century. Is it not possible that they have found a way to manipulate these tests?" Jake felt his temper starting to rise, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the chamber. "Your Majesty," said Elder Ben Cooper, the old human philosopher who had arrived on Nexus Prime just that morning, "if we could fake genetic markers this precisely, don't you think we would have done it long ago instead of accepting our position as the youngest and weakest species in the galaxy?" Elder Cooper was 70 years old and had spent most of his life studying ancient history and alien cultures. He had white hair and kind eyes, but Jake had learned quickly that the old man had a mind like a steel trap and wasn't afraid to use it. Empress Zara's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you suggesting that I am wrong, human? I'm suggesting that fear makes us all see threats where none exist," Elder Cooper replied calmly. "The boy has submitted to every test you've demanded. The results are clear. Perhaps it's time to consider what this means instead of looking for ways to deny it." General Corks, the green-scaled being who had intercepted Jake's ship, stood up from his seat. "Even if the genetic markers are real, that doesn't mean we should accept human rule. The first ones vanished for a reason. Perhaps their bloodline was meant to die out. Or perhaps," said Dr. Sam Rodriguez, who was sitting with the human delegation, "it was meant to survive until the galaxy was ready for a different kind of leadership." Jake had been listening to this debate for hours, and he was getting tired of people talking about him like he wasn't there. He stepped forward and raised his voice just enough to cut through the murmur of conversation that was always present in the chamber. "With respect to everyone here," Jake said, "I didn't ask for this. I was just doing my job when we found that ship. But if the tests are right, if I really do carry this bloodline, then maybe we should figure out what that means instead of arguing about whether it's convenient." High Counselor Vex nodded approvingly. "The human speaks wisdom. According to our oldest records, any claimant to the throne must undergo the trials of worthiness. These trials were established by the first ones themselves to ensure that only those truly fit to rule could claim the crown." Empress Zara laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. "The trials. Those ancient rituals haven't been used for millennia. Half the knowledge of how to conduct them has been lost." "Not lost," said a new voice from the upper tiers. Jake looked up to see a being he hadn't noticed before. Ancient beyond measure, with skin like weathered stone and eyes that seemed to hold the memory of stars. Merely waiting for the proper time, High Counselor Vex bowed deeply. Keeper of records, we are honored by your presence. The ancient being slowly made its way down to the chamber floor, moving with the careful dignity of extreme age. I am the last keeper of the complete trial records. If this young human truly wishes to claim his inheritance, he must prove himself worthy as the first ones intended. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do these trials involve? The keeper turned its ancient eyes toward him. 5 tests, young claimant. 5 worlds, each designed to challenge a different aspect of leadership. Courage in the face of death. Wisdom when faced with impossible choices. Compassion for those who suffer. Strategy in the midst of chaos. And finally, the ability to unite those who have always stood apart. And if I fail? Jake asked. Then you die, the keeper said simply. As have all who attempted the trials before you. The chamber fell silent. Jake could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon him, waiting to see how he would respond. He thought about his crew, about Earth, about the impossible situation he found himself in. He thought about the way the ancient technology had recognized something in his blood that he didn't even know existed. How many have attempted these trials? He asked. 17 over the past 1,000,000 years, the keeper replied. None have succeeded. None have survived all 5 tests. Lisa Brooks, who had been sitting with the human delegation, stood up. Captain, you don't have to do this. We can go back to Earth and pretend none of this ever happened. Jake looked at her and saw the concern in her eyes. Then he looked around the chamber at all the alien faces, some hostile, some curious, some afraid. He thought about what Elder Cooper had said about fear making people see threats where none existed. If I walk away, Jake said, this doesn't end. There will always be questions about whether the genetic markers are real, whether humans are trying to seize power, whether the galaxy has a rightful ruler out there somewhere. The only way to settle this is to take the trials. Empress Zara rose from her seat again. And when you fail and die, human, what then? Will your people claim we murdered their precious heir? Jake met her silver eyes without flinching. If I die in trials established by the first ones themselves, then I die honestly. That's more than most people can say. General Corks made his grinding sound that passed for laughter. Bold words from a species that has existed for less than a cosmic instant. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs, Jake said. Fresh perspective from a species that hasn't had time to get set in its ways. High Counselor Vex raised his hand for silence. The human has accepted the challenge of the trials. According to ancient law, he has 30 days to prepare before the first test begins. Are there any who would speak for or against this course of action? To Jake's surprise, it was Ambassador Ryan Clark who stood up. The Earth government supports Captain Morrison's decision, but we request that human observers be allowed to witness the trials. Denied, Empress Zara said immediately. The trials are sacred. Only the claimant and the appointed guardians may be present. Elder Cooper cleared his throat. Your Majesty, perhaps a compromise. Allow one observer from Earth, someone with knowledge of human culture and capabilities. It would ensure fairness and prevent later accusations of deception. The keeper nodded slowly. This is acceptable. Choose your observer, young claimant. Jake didn't hesitate. Sam Rodriguez. He knows more about alien cultures and ancient history than anyone I've ever met. If anyone can help me understand what I'm facing, it's him." Sam looked surprised, but nodded acceptance. "I'll do my best, Jake." High Counselor Vex struck a ceremonial gong that filled the chamber with deep, resonant sound. "It is decided. In 30 days, the human Jake Morrison will begin the trials of worthiness. If he succeeds, he will be crowned ruler of the galaxy. If he fails, the question of royal bloodline will be settled forever." As the session ended and beings began filing out of the chamber, Jake found himself standing alone in the center of the vast space, looking up at the empty seats and wondering what he had just gotten himself into. Somewhere in the galaxy were 5 worlds where he would face tests designed by beings who had vanished before human civilization had even begun. He had 30 days to prepare for trials that had killed 17 previous claimants. Somehow he was going to have to succeed where everyone else had failed or die trying. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, Jake felt something he hadn't expected. He felt ready. Jake Morrison stood on the balcony of the Imperial Palace on Nexus Prime and looked out over a city that stretched beyond the horizon. 6 months had passed since he had somehow survived all 5 trials, and he still couldn't quite believe he was actually wearing the crown of the Galactic Emperor. The weight of it felt heavier every day, not because of the metal and jewels, but because of what it represented. The trials had changed him in ways he was still discovering. On the world of endless storms, he had learned that courage wasn't about not being afraid, but about doing what needed to be done despite the fear. In the crystal caves where he had faced impossible moral choices, he had discovered that wisdom sometimes meant accepting that there were no perfect answers. The war-torn planet where he had brought peace between 2 species that had been fighting for centuries had taught him that compassion required more strength than violence ever could. But it was the final trial that haunted him most. Standing before representatives of every major species in the galaxy, and somehow convincing them to work together on a project that required each of them to sacrifice something they held dear. It had taken 3 days of arguments, negotiations, and appeals to their better nature before they had finally agreed to build something together instead of tearing each other apart. Now, he was emperor, and he was learning that surviving the trials had been the easy part. "Your Majesty," came a voice from behind him. Jake turned to see Captain Alex Stone, the head of his security detail, approaching with the careful respect that everyone seemed to use around him now. Alex was a good man, a former Earth military officer who took his job seriously, but still remembered to call Jake by his first name when they were alone. "What is it, Alex?" Jake asked, grateful for the informality. "We have a situation developing. General Carl Davis has called for another meeting of the Resistance Council, and our intelligence suggests they're planning something more serious than just political protests this time." Jake sighed and walked back into his office, a massive room filled with furniture and artwork from dozens of different worlds. He had tried to make it feel more human by adding some earth plants and a few pictures from home, but it still felt like he was living in a museum. The resistance had been growing stronger every month since his coronation. It started with just a few displaced officials who had lost power when Jake restructured the government, but now it included representatives from at least a dozen species who believed that humans had no right to rule the galaxy. General Davis, who used to serve in the Earth military before Jake promoted him to a position in the Galactic Fleet, had become their unofficial leader after he publicly denounced Jake's policies as too weak and too human. "How serious?" Jake asked as he sat down behind his desk. which was carved from a single piece of crystal that supposedly came from the first one's homeworld. Serious enough that Admiral Sue Patterson has withdrawn her fleet from the border patrols. She's claiming, "It's for maintenance, but our sources say she's actually joining the resistance." Jake felt his stomach drop. Admiral Patterson commanded one of the largest fleets in the galaxy, and she had never been happy about taking orders from a human who used to be just an exploration captain. If she was joining the resistance, it meant they were preparing for open rebellion. "Any word from the other fleet commanders?" Jake asked. "Mixed reactions. About half are staying loyal, but the others are either joining the resistance or declaring neutrality. Your Majesty, we may be looking at civil war." Before Jake could respond, the door to his office opened and his wife entered. Queen Vera Morrison had been Vera Chen before their marriage, a diplomat from Earth who had agreed to marry Jake to help strengthen the alliance between humanity and the galactic government. She was smart, beautiful, and completely dedicated to helping him succeed as emperor. She was also the mother of their 3-year-old son, Danny, who had inherited Jake's dark hair and Vera's quick mind. "Jake," Vera said, and the concern in her voice told him she had heard about the resistance meeting, too. "The council is asking for an emergency session. They want to know how you plan to respond to the growing rebellion." Jake looked at his wife and his security chief and felt the weight of impossible decisions settling on his shoulders again. When he had taken the trials, he had thought the hardest part would be surviving them. Now he realized that had been just the beginning. "What are my options?" he asked Alex. "Militarily? We could move to arrest the resistance leaders before they can organize their rebellion. A show of strength might convince others not to join them." "And politically?" Jake asked Vera. "Some of the council members are suggesting compromise. Offer the resistance some concessions. Maybe restructure the government to give individual species more autonomy." Jake stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the city where millions of beings from hundreds of different worlds lived and worked together. Since becoming emperor, he had tried to rule the way humans would want to be ruled, with emphasis on individual freedom, innovation, and cooperation. Some worlds had flourished under these policies, achieving levels of prosperity and technological advancement they had never known before. But others chafed under what they saw as human weakness and lack of proper authority. "Your Majesty," Alex said carefully, "there's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting that some resistance members are planning an attempt on your life." Vera's face went pale. "They want to assassinate you?" "It makes sense from their perspective," Jake said, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "If they can kill me and make it look like my policies were failures, they can justify going back to the old ways of doing things." "We can increase security," Alex said. "Move you to a more secure location. Limit your public appearances." Jake shook his head. "That's exactly the wrong response. If I start hiding from my own people, it proves their point that I'm not fit to rule." "Jake," Vera said, "you have to think about Danny. He needs his father." The mention of his son hit Jake harder than any political argument could have. Danny was growing up as a prince in a galaxy that might tear itself apart, fighting over whether his father had the right to be emperor. What kind of future was Jake building for him? "There's a third option," Jake said after a long moment of thought. "What?" Vera asked. "I could step down." The room fell silent. Alex and Vera stared at him as if he had suggested flying into a star. "Jake," Vera said carefully, "you can't be serious." "Why not? I never wanted to be emperor in the first place. I was just trying to do my job when we found that ship. Maybe the galaxy would be better off without me trying to force human values on everyone. Alex stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, stepping down now would be the worst possible outcome. It would tell every species in the galaxy that humans can be intimidated into giving up power. It would make Earth a target for every ambitious species that wants to settle old scores. Jake knew Alex was right, but the temptation was still there. He could go back to being Captain Morrison, exploring new worlds with Lisa and Sam, leaving the politics to people who understood them better than he did. Besides, Vera added, what about the worlds that are thriving under your rule? What about the species that have found new freedom and prosperity because of your policies? Don't you owe them something too? Before Jake could answer, his personal communicator chimed with an urgent message. He activated the holographic display and saw Dr. Mike Johnson, one of Earth's leading scientists, appearing in miniature above his desk. Your Majesty, Dr. Johnson said, barely able to contain his excitement. We've made a discovery that changes everything. We've found another First One's facility, and this one is still active. The technology inside suggests that the royal bloodline wasn't meant to rule forever. It was meant to guide the galaxy towards something new. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a sense that maybe there was a purpose to all of this after all. What kind of something new? A form of government that incorporates the best aspects of every species' governing philosophy. The First Ones weren't trying to create an empire, Your Majesty. They were trying to create a template for the galaxy to grow beyond the need for empires at all. Jake looked at Vera and Alex and saw the same realization dawning on their faces that he felt in his own mind. Maybe the resistance wasn't just an obstacle to overcome. Maybe it was part of the process, a necessary step towards something better than any of them had imagined. Dr. Johnson, Jake said, how long until you can have a full report on this facility? Give me 48 hours, Your Majesty. You have it. Alex, postpone any military action against the resistance until we know more. Vera, tell the Council. I'll address them in 3 days with a proposal that might change how we think about this entire situation. As his wife and security chief left to carry out his orders, Jake remained at the window, watching the lights of the city come alive as night fell over Nexus Prime. Somewhere out there, people were planning to kill him because they thought he was trying to rule them. But maybe if Dr. Johnson was right, the solution wasn't to rule them at all. Maybe it was time to teach the galaxy how to rule itself. Jake Morrison stood in the same chamber where he had once accepted the challenge of the trials. But this time, he wasn't wearing the crown of the Galactic Emperor. The ornate headpiece sat on a simple table beside him, catching the light from the chamber's ancient illumination system. As representatives from every major species in the galaxy watched him in tense silence. 3 months had passed since Dr. Mike Johnson's discovery of the active First One's facility, and everything had changed. The ancient technology had revealed its final secret, not through genetic scanners or holographic messages, but through a simple data core that contained the complete plan the First Ones had laid out millions of years ago. They had never intended to create a permanent empire ruled by their bloodline. Instead, they had designed a test, a way to guide the galaxy toward a form of cooperation that went beyond the traditional patterns of conquest and submission that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. The royal bloodline was meant to appear when the galaxy was ready for this transformation, to serve as a catalyst for change rather than a permanent ruler. Jake had spent weeks studying the First One's records with Sam Rodriguez and a team of the galaxy's best archaeologists and political scientists. What they found was both simple and revolutionary. A framework for government that combined elements from every known species' approach to leadership, creating something entirely new. "Representatives of the galaxy," Jake said, his voice carrying, clearly through the chamber without the need for amplification. 3 months ago, Dr. Johnson and his team discovered the true purpose of the First One's legacy. Today, I want to share that discovery with all of you. Admiral Sue Patterson, who had been leading the Resistance fleet in open rebellion for 2 months, sat in the section reserved for non-aligned species. General Carl Davis sat beside her, his face set in the same expression of hostile skepticism he had worn since the rebellion began. But Jake also saw curiosity in some faces, even among those who had opposed him most strongly. "The First Ones didn't vanish because they failed," Jake continued. "They vanished because they succeeded. They created a template for galactic civilization that would activate when the time was right, when enough different species had developed enough different approaches to governance that a synthesis became possible." High Counselor Vex, who had remained neutral throughout the political crisis, leaned forward in his seat. "What kind of synthesis?" Jake gestured to Sam, who activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The display showed a complex diagram that looked like a combination of organizational chart and star map. "The First Ones called it the Cooperative Commonwealth," Sam explained. "Instead of one species ruling over others, it's a system where each world governs itself according to its own cultural values, but participates in larger decisions through a council structure that ensures every voice is heard." General Davis stood up. "More human idealism. You're trying to dress up your weakness as some kind of ancient wisdom." Jake had expected this reaction. "General, what if I told you that the military structure you prefer, with clear chains of command and decisive leadership, would still exist in this system? Each world would organize its own defense forces however it chooses, and in times of crisis, temporary unified command could be established through council vote." "And what about trade disputes?" asked Representative Corks, the green-scaled being, who had once threatened Jake's ship. "What about species that refuse to cooperate?" "The beauty of the system," Vera said, standing up from her seat in the human delegation, "is that it doesn't require everyone to cooperate the same way. Species that prefer isolation can remain isolated. Species that want close integration can form subgroups within the larger framework. The only requirement is that no one species can force its will on another." Empress Zara Velkoth, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "And who enforces this requirement? Who has the authority to prevent one species from dominating others?" Jake had known this question would come, and it was the heart of everything he was trying to accomplish. "No one, Your Majesty, that's the point. The system is designed so that domination becomes impossible rather than forbidden." "Impossible how?" she asked. Jake activated another part of the holographic display, showing trade routes and resource flows between different worlds. Every species becomes so interconnected with others that attacking or dominating another species would damage the aggressor more than the victim. Instead of preventing war through threat of punishment, you prevent it by making war economically and socially self-destructive. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives began debating the implications among themselves. Jake let the conversation continue for several minutes before raising his hand for silence. "There's one more thing," he said. "The First One's records make it clear that this system can only work if it's chosen freely by all participants. It can't be imposed by force, even by someone who claims royal authority." Jake walked over to the table where the crown sat waiting. The ancient artifact seemed to pulse with its own inner light, as if it understood what was about to happen. "Which is why," Jake said, picking up the crown. "I'm returning this to where it belongs." He carried the crown to a small altar that had been built into the chamber's design millions of years ago. As soon as he placed it there, the altar began to glow, and the crown slowly sank into the crystalline surface until it disappeared completely. "Sir, Age of Emperors is over," Jake announced to the stunned chamber. "The question now is whether the Age of Cooperation can begin." Admiral Patterson stood up slowly. "You're giving up the throne? Just like that?" "I'm not giving it up," Jake said. "I'm completing the job I was chosen to do. The royal bloodline was never about ruling forever. It was about showing the galaxy that there was another way." General Davis looked confused and angry. "What happens to the rebellion? What happens to all the species that opposed human rule?" Jake smiled for the first time in months. "There is no human rule anymore, General. There's just the choice each world makes about how it wants to participate in the larger galactic community." High Counselor Vex stood up and looked around the chamber. "The human has made his proposal. Each species must now decide whether to accept this new framework or continue under the old system of competing empires." Over the next several hours, representatives debated, argued, and voted. Some species chose to join the new cooperative commonwealth immediately. Others decided to wait and see how it worked before committing. A few declared their intention to remain independent under the old system. But as Jake watched the discussions unfold, he realized that something fundamental had changed. Instead of viewing each other as potential threats or subjects, the species were beginning to see each other as potential partners. The very act of choosing whether to cooperate had started the process of cooperation itself. Months later, Jake stood on the bridge of a new ship, the Terra Nova 2, watching his crew prepare for another exploration mission. Lisa Brooks was still his second in command, Sam Rodriguez was still his science officer, and they were heading out to map unknown regions of space just like they always had. The difference was that now they weren't just representing Earth. They were part of a galactic exploration service that included crew members from 20 different species, all working together to expand the boundaries of known space. "Captain," Lisa said from her station, "we're receiving a transmission from Nexus Prime." The view screen showed his son, Danny, now 4 years old and living with Vera in the capital city, while she served as Earth's representative to the Commonwealth. Council. Danny had his father's dark hair and his mother's quick mind, and he was growing up in a galaxy that was very different from the one Jake had been born into. "Hi, Daddy," Danny said, waving at the camera. "Mommy says you're going to find new planets." "That's right, son," Jake said. "And maybe someday you'll come with me." After the transmission ended, Jake returned to his captain's chair and looked out at the stars ahead of them. Somewhere out there were worlds that no one had ever seen, civilizations that might join the growing community of cooperation, or might choose to remain isolated, or might have their own ideas about how the galaxy should work. It didn't matter. The important thing was that they would have the choice. Sam looked up from his science station. "Jake, I've been thinking about the first one's plan. Do you think they knew it would work out this way?" Jake considered the question. "I think they knew that if we ever got smart enough to find their records, we'd be smart enough to figure out what to do with them. And if we weren't smart enough, then we'd keep fighting each other until we destroyed ourselves and some other species would eventually evolve to take our place." Jake smiled. Good thing we turned out to be smarter than that. As the Terra Nova 2 jumped to hyperspace and headed toward unknown stars, Jake Morrison reflected on how strange his life had become. He had started as an exploration captain, become an emperor, and ended up as an exploration captain again. But the galaxy he was exploring now was fundamentally different from the one he had left behind. It was a galaxy where humans had proven that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when to give up power, where cooperation was stronger than domination, where the future belonged not to any single species, but to all of them working together. It was, Jake thought as he watched the stars blur past, exactly the kind of future worth exploring.